right, we have a visitor at the door. Who that?
Oh, it's a teacher.
I'm right here. I'm right here.
Oh,
I'm right here.
I'm sorry to bother you. Is this a whole meeting?
No, it's okay. I can sign it.
I had.
Oh, you have stuff.
And I have zucchini muffins.
Oh,
So if your class wants to have the rest of them, they can't.
I-
I just have to save one for Father Miller. I'm so sorry.
Do I get one of those?
yeah, of course. It smells delightful. Okay, thank you. Okay, so this is Molly. Is it Koehn?
It is Koehn.
All right.
Yes.
Okay, everyone, come get a zucchini muffin if you would like one. This is Molly Koehn. This is Art Chat number 3. Molly Koehn from Houston Molly Koehn from Kansas by way of Houston. Yes.
By way of Phoenix, by way of Houston.
By way of Phoenix, by way of Houston. And thank you for joining us in the Art Chat. And let's begin.
Cool. Excellent. Awesome. Rock on. Okay, so I've prepared a presentation. Like I said, my studio internet is not the best in the whole entire world. It's also just a little noisy outside, so you might hear some cars and whatnot. I'm in a warehouse district, but I've prepared a presentation. So I'm going to walk through my work and I'm going to share my screen. And this can be totally, it can be informal. Feel free to ask questions. Let's get that presentation up so everybody should be able to see the presentation.
Indeed.
All right, rock on. Okay. Yeah, so like Robbie said, my name's Molly. I live in Houston, Texas. That is my website and my Instagram. And so I am just going to work sort of linearly through my work, starting at undergrad. And like I said, feel free to ask any questions as I go through this.
Well, let's start
Yeah.
with where Molly Moso comes from.
Oh, wow, what a good question. That's so funny because I've had some curators contact me recently thinking that my last name is Moso and have like proposed my work to clients as Molly Moso. And I'm like, oh no. But Moso came from my husband now. We were friends in high school, took this online quiz to see what should your nickname be. And he answered it according to how I would answer it, he thought. And it said that my nickname should be Moso. And so I made my Instagram like back when it started, whenever that was, and I haven't changed it since, even though nobody calls me Molly Moso. It's just my Instagram handle. And nobody calls me Moso. It's like him and one other friend from high school. Yep.
I think it's catchy. I
do too.
Yeah. Well, in Lake Charles, you are known as Molly Moso.
Good. I love it. I love it. I'll keep it going. I think it's a little catchier than Molly Koehn, actually. So who knows? But anyway, so yeah, I'm originally from Southwest Kansas, a very small town of about 1,500 people. And so I went to Fort Hays State, which is about smack dab in the middle of Kansas. And it's a fairly traditional art program as far as they've got drawing, painting, ceramics, graphic design, and printmaking. Oh, and sculpture. And so there was no fibers department there. And as you're going to see, and as you can see probably behind me, I've got some looms and fiber work. And what you've seen on my Instagram is mostly fiber work. But I actually started as a drawing major at Fort Hays. And actually, I lied. I started as a graphic design major. I lasted about a semester and realized that's not what I want to do because I didn't want to go into the commercial field of graphic design. And so I switched to drawing with the encouragement of my drawing professor. And what you're seeing here is some of the work from my thesis show. And what I've realized now, being like 15 years removed of my undergrad, 2013, we're only in 2022. That's not even 15 years. That's only 9 years. Being 9 years removed of my undergrad, I am a place-based artist, and my work is highly, highly influenced by wherever I am. And I create work to process the world around me. And so as an undergraduate student, I was driving to and from home, which was 2.5 hours, quite a bit, or would often just take drives into the countryside. Hays, Kansas is only like 40,000 people. It's also fairly small. And so it was easy to just get out of town and drive and drive and drive and drive. And along the countryside, I would find all of these abandoned farmsteads. And so the work that you're seeing on the screen here is one of those that I found, and it's several images of it in perspective. So it's combined here, as well as what I picked up from that place. So you're also going to see that as a common theme in my work, that I'm often picking up things and collecting and gathering, and that greatly informs my work. I came to fibers at Fort Hays State University through my drawing professor, Amy Schmierbach, who I had like vaguely mentioned in high school. I made two weavings in high school on a frame loom, which is just a big frame with strings wrapped around it. And you weave just like you wove with the paper, except with thread or yarn. And so I had vaguely like mentioned that to Amy one day. And so then she comes to me and she says, Molly, do you want to do an undergraduate research experience? And an undergraduate research experience is when you team up with a professor and an undergrad. They team up together and they study something. And it was mostly math and science. And we're like, we're going to learn how to weave. Yeah. So I learned to weave with my professor, who is still an amazing friend of mine. We have kept up our relationship throughout the years. And so I got so much out of going to Fort Hays, but like the best thing that I got out of Fort Hays was studying under her and being able to learn how to weave with her. And so we just kind of like figured it out. And so here you can see that I start to bring in weaving into my work. My thesis was something about how these abandoned places could feel more wanted if we draped a blanket or like a cool weaving over them. It was like pretty one note as far as my mind went. But after, again, like looking at it now, I pull out a lot more information from it. But that's what this piece is about. It's like trying to make a building wanted by putting a weaving over it. So this is all hand woven. It's also all hand spun yarn. So I also learned how to spin yarn while in that undergraduate research experience. Moving on. Okay, after undergrad, I went to grad school at Arizona State. Arizona State is in Tempe, Arizona, which is like a suburb of Phoenix, Arizona, although they might not like it if you called them a suburb, because at one point they were both like two towns and they just like merged into each other like so many of our large cities are doing these days. And I went to grad school for fibers for two reasons. One, I needed to learn more about fibers. I needed to learn how to actually weave, and and everything else about fibers. Like Fort Hays had no fibers department. I didn't know anything. I didn't know like how to dye my yarn, how to process yarn, what yarn was, what material was it made out of. I knew how to spin it from wool, but there's so many other types of yarns. I didn't know anything about surface design, which is really where my work has moved in the last few years. So I needed to learn, right? I also went to grad school because I didn't know what else to do. And I was like very much encouraged by Amy to go to grad school. And so I was like, okay, cool, let's do it. I'll go to grad school. So just right out of undergrad, I went to grad school. And in grad school, they tell you that your work you got to come up with a thesis. It's got to mean something. And everything that you do has got to mean something. Or at least that was very much the program that I was in. And so I was really into plants. So I started studying invasive species. I liked this idea of plants taking over the world. And I also got into this process called eco-printing. So what you're seeing here is eucalyptus leaves. And so this was one of my first major installations that I was able to do. I got a shipping container and the curator pretty much said, like, do whatever. I also only had like 2 or 3 weeks to put this together. Which is like very typical of the art world, that you have this like very short amount of time to do a really great thing. So I was studying invasive species and doing these eco prints, which is a process of dyeing fabric. And I was using eucalyptus, which was all over the valley. It was all over Tempe, Arizona. And it's non-native. And so it was taking up, like, it's using water. It's a super water intensive tree to grow, and it's technically classified as invasive in California. And so this project is a bunch of eucalyptus leaves. They look like flowers, but they're eucalyptus leaves pinned to the wall with tiny dressing pins. And as you progress through the space, they get closer and closer together and eventually turn black, demonstrating like this sort of linear movement of them becoming evil. We also see the symbol of good and evil, like yin and yang, the black and the white, as well as these sort of concrete structures. So that's where my my grad school work started off. I was doing these installations, actually not doing a lot of fiber work. And then I move into this more sculptural work where these are woven structures. And I was thinking a lot about how plants, when they are transplanted, have to be propped up for a while. If you've ever seen a tree that's planted, or this is referencing a saguaro that's been transplanted, they're propped up and for quite a few years, right? Because they have to establish root structures. And so I'm thinking about structure here, and I'm thinking about human interaction with the environment, because Phoenix is such a weird place. It's this desert, or it's just this huge city located in the middle of a desert that is using like one river for water, and there's water just getting pumped in to sustain this ever-growing city. It's full of non-native plants. It's just like a bizarre place to live because it's so desertous, and we've made it into this like desert paradise, and it's falsely created. So I was really interested in that idea, and so I'm using these really thin support structures, and I'm also utilizing steel in this weaving here. So I have a sample. I don't know how big I am to you on your screen. Am I big at all? Can you see what I'm holding up?
Yeah, we can see. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So what's in my hand here is what you see in this like sort of translucent area. This is woven stainless steel. And so you can see, like, I'm holding it over my face, right? It's really transparent. And it's really fragile. It doesn't seem at all like it's steel. Right? Who would look at this and say, this is stainless steel? It's such an amazing sort of ephemeral feeling material. It doesn't feel like it's gonna last, right? And so I'm thinking about that in this work, and how like I'm utilizing stainless steel, which is usually meant to hold up a building, but here it's not. It's not giving any structure. Without these support devices, this structure would totally fall over. And so that work moves us into my thesis, where I'm still making these structures, but they're quite a bit larger. These are they're like 18 inches tall by 6 inches wide, and these become human-sized. So I'm also thinking about the relationship of myself in Phoenix, Arizona, and Tempe, as well as the relationship of urban environments, as well as quote unquote natural environments. So the structures become quite larger. I bring in some actual plants. I'm doing a little bit of digital work here in the background, which I think is the next image. I'll back up to that other one. These are images of palm trees growing in the desert. Palm trees, especially the ones that are grown in Phoenix. Again, you're going to see this common theme of non-native plants. I'm like totally not against non-native species, but I am definitely a promoter of native species. I think that there can be definitely a balance between the two. But palm trees take a lot of water to grow, and here they are being grown in the desert for landscaping purposes. They're not even the kind of palm trees that give you fruit or anything. So these are Google images from Google Earth that I took screenshots of. and reconfigured into kind of this like quilt-like structure or this woven structure. So again, I'm thinking a lot about structure, and you can see too with these sculptures that I start bringing in this sort of scaffolding structure that's holding up the then woven. So again, this is like the stainless steel comes in a yarn that actually has a natural yarn over it, which is what's in my hand here. And so again, it gives like some nice structure. I can put folds in it. But
the stainless steel comes in a yarn that you're
yeah.
holding?
Yeah, so this is woven. Let me just I'm gonna grab it. I'll be right back. I gotta take my headphones off. All right, I'm back. Okay, I unfortunately cannot see myself, but I can see you. I'm not sure why I can't see myself. Yeah. So I don't know if I'm like holding these up very well to where you're able to see them.
Yeah.
But this is a cone of stainless steel and linen. It is literally hair thin. It's outrageously thin. Let's see if I can find the end there. So here's like a little piece of it. Like you can't even see it.
Yeah.
I shouldn't have chosen a white one. And this is stainless steel and silk. So what it is a very thin strand of stainless steel. Like it's hair thin, it's so breakable. And it's plied, which means it's twisted around the natural fiber. So I get them in cones like such, and I weave them into a pattern first.
You made that. Okay.
I made it. Oh yeah, it's so cool. Yeah, so I weave it into a pattern first, and then depending on the fiber that I'm using, I either burn it or I soak it in bleach to remove the natural fiber. And then that's what's happened here to have just the stainless steel. So it's definitely a destructive process, which you could think about in relation to the work that I'm thinking a lot about how destructive humans are to natural environments and how we create these environments by destroying what's around us. I usually don't get that dark, but you can make that relation.
So the darkness on these objects, on these woven pieces here, that's burned, and then the upper portion is bleached?
No, actually, this is just black fiber. So these are all bleached here. And the transition is happening from the bleaching.
Okay. What is the title of this exhibit?
It's called The Physical Features of Place.
Okay.
So again, it's very much about me understanding Phoenix as a city in the desert. So understanding this human-created environment in relation to the once before natural environment. And I'm also questioning a lot what the definition of natural is. Because, I mean, we're part of nature, right? So are the actions that we do natural? I don't know. I don't have answers. I ask a lot of questions.
Were any of your instructors native Arizonians? And I guess there's two questions. One, were there any native Arizonians? Two, what was the reaction of, was there anyone native there that was, asking about your Kansas point of view?
That's an interesting question. Okay, so none of my instructors were from Arizona. The people that were from Phoenix specifically, and they're from Phoenix, they're not native, like as far as culturally native, they're not Native American, but they were born and raised in Phoenix. Very much had the same relationship with the city as I did. They recognize its weirdness. Yeah. That it is this like metropolis. It seems unsustainable that all these humans can gather in the desert, and Phoenix is like it's 4 million people. It might be 5 by now. It's giant, and it also has like Houston's problem of urban expansion of like everything being really spread out. So it takes a long time to get from like here to here. But there's something magical about this city. So I definitely like don't want this to be seen as a criticism, but rather this just interpretation of trying to grapple with like what is happening here.
Yeah.
It's a strange place in which like I think that ultimately, you know, I'll back up to this view of the whole room of my thesis. It's kind of a strange arrangement of these objects that are they plants? Are they humans? Are they buildings? What are they? I don't know. I can't answer that question still to this day. I think they're everything. I think they're all of that. And as you probably figured out in doing your own little weavings, that it's not a fast process, especially when I'm using such really fine yarn, and it's repetitive. And so there's an element of meditation that comes into weaving because you are doing the same thing over and 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 over again, and like repeat. So there's also a process of thinking that comes into this work through the like physical creation of each one of these. And there's also like a really nice contrast too. My husband hates this, so which I really appreciate his opinions. But he's like, you have these amazingly woven structures on top of like, what is this thing? They're jumbled together. They get worse. They get more jumbled together as we progress through my work. And so he thinks like it's not an honor to this craft that I'm mastering, to have this really dilapidated, like thrown together thing. But to me, it's such a great symbol of what we do as humans. Like we make one action and it doesn't work out, you know, because we don't know everything. And so we put a Band-Aid on it. And then that still doesn't work out. So it's this like push and pull. So I really appreciate the contrast. Okay, so moving on. We saw these, they're just hung over here on the left side of the wall. But I start to incorporate my drawing practice back into my work here. So these are digitally collaged. They are drawn, so the black and white portion is graphite on paper, and then I scanned it in, and then digitally collaged the rest of the elements. And so as you saw, they ended up in a printed form, just sort of pinned on the wall. They were printed on what's called plotter paper, which is really thin, and impermanent. I think about impermanence quite a bit. Okay, so the idea behind these pieces is that if I can have a non-native palm tree or a eucalyptus tree growing in my front yard, like why can't I transplant a mountain? And so I really wanted to embrace the absurdity behind this idea of landscaping, of moving anything anywhere that you want it to be. And so why can't I have a mountain? So these are like conceptual or like sort of like plans of how I could transplant a mountain. And here it is transplanted on like this little table. And these are also mountains that are in the Phoenix area. So they're mountains that I was seeing every day. This is Camelback. And here we have it propped up like a tree so it can establish roots. And here we have them like in these scaffolding structures, thinking about how they could be transported, how they would be lifted up out of the ground. They're even cut in sections. So these mountains, this is 4 peaks. They go together linearly. This is all one set of mountains, and they're sort of like cut off and stuck into these boxes. And we also have like little plants throughout. So a lot of fun digitally collaging this work. So moving on, that was my graduate thesis. And after my graduate thesis, I moved to Houston, Texas, which is where I am now. And in Houston, Houston is also a pretty weird city. So I'm fortunate that I've moved from one weird city to another weird city as far as its relationship with the environment around it. So I moved to Houston as a resident at the Houston Center for Contemporary Craft. in 2017, and I haven't left. And during my residency, I continued to expand these woven structures that were then on some sort of like scaffolding like structures like you see here, as well as continuing to collage digitally. So actually what you see is an image of the sculpture, and then it's been collaged or like cut out with a different background, and I added in these shadows. So they're really simple. I think a lot about space and openness. And so I continued to explore this series. You can see that they've changed a little bit as far as the structure is actually going up through the woven area now. And I start to incorporate quite a bit more color. And as we progress through my work, you'll also note that my work in Phoenix was quite, kind of brown and neutral colors. And my work as we go through my time in Houston has really become quite a bit more colorful. And again, that's just a response to where I am. Colorful. Houston's a very colorful city. It's so much greener than Phoenix, which is another like major change. So again, I'm just exploring these. They're quite a bit, they're very small. They're like 4 inches wide on all 4 sides. And then this one that we're looking at here is probably about 12 inches. So they're skinny.
Would you be showing these? This is on that thin paper. Is that correct?
So these actually never got printed. I did show the sculptures in one case all together. I didn't think it was successful, so it's not in here. So these, like I showed them as a group once, and maybe my response to them not quite working was moving into this digital space. The digital space also, as we're going to see later in the presentation, really helps me think. I'm able to get my ideas out. And so these could be sketches, or maybe they are actual pieces. I guess for now they are sketches because nothing ever happened to them. And then the sculptures, I think I disassemble quite a bit of my work after a certain period of time, and then it gets consumed elsewhere in the work. So that's probably what's happened to the sculptures. They're elsewhere somewhere.
Can you talk a little bit about, I'm totally digging the shadows. And I'm like, at first I thought, because you were doing it, I thought, oh, that's a desert thing. It's a desert light thing in Arizona. But then you brought it with you over to Houston, and it adds a lot of volume to the structures that your husband doesn't necessarily care for.
Yeah, definitely. This is actually a really interesting question that you bring up, because just on Sunday, my husband and I went to Koehn Park. I got into birding over the pandemic. And so Koehn Park has this great observation deck that you can walk on top of. And it was about 8 o'clock in the morning. So the sun's rising about 7:30 here right now. And so the sun was just up over the horizon, that point where it's casting the really long shadow, right? And so there was this shadow cast on this field of the observation deck and us standing in it. And my husband says, "Oh, you're going to take a picture of that?" And so I also process the world through photos. I have like tons and tons and tons of photos of things I see that I'm like, "Oh, wow, look at that. Oh, wow, 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 wow." And so that was so me to take a picture of this like long shadow. And so there's something about time that I'm attracted to it, because it symbolizes either very early in the morning or very late, not very late at night, but like right at the transition of a day. And so I like that aspect. I also like that in the earlier work, the shadows actually were there because they didn't make sense with how the light was cast on certain elements. Yeah. So like, right, the light's coming from here, but the shadows are going in the wrong direction. So I utilized it as somewhat of absurdity, right? This is a great example here where the shadow is coming from here, but then it's also here. So like, are there 2 lights? And like, why doesn't the shadow continue here? What's happening? And I love it's surreal, right? First of all, the shadow doesn't quite look right. Like at some point we should see the structure, but no, it's just these legs that are giant. And so there's scale, there's time, but the first time that I used them was from the desert. So I think that I have carried it with me from the desert, but I still have those experiences. Wherever I go, I am definitely a morning person, and so I see my shadow quite a bit. And yeah, so I like that symbol of the time of day that it is.
Yeah, yeah.
That one turned pink. All right, so continuing on, this, as you see, was actually shown. It does become a digital version, and I do show that. But I started incorporating, well, Houston has a lot more skyscrapers than Phoenix did. And like I already said, I'm from like nowhere, Kansas, you know? Skyscrapers, not in my vocabulary. And I find skyscrapers to be like so fascinating. These huge buildings of pattern and windows. And so there's a lot of skyscraper influenced work in my Houston body of work here. And also Houston has a lot more trees, most of which were not here when Houston was founded. And they've been planted because it's nicer to live with trees. Trees equal nice. That's how I think we as humans, or at least a certain group of humans, we think trees equal nice. And so we've got lots of trees and also lots of freeway interchanges. Houston is 2 million people larger than Phoenix was. So I've gone from like a big city to an even bigger city. And so I'm seeing freeway interchanges, I'm seeing trees, I'm passing under bridges. And so that's where this arch form comes from. I also, when I first moved here, Houston is not very open compared to the desert. It feels a little bit more claustrophobic. And so I kind of always felt like it was like looming over me. So that's also what this is about. And I also started incorporating at this point AstroTurf, which you're gonna see in my work. I got some of it, like I've even put it in a weaving at this point. I love this stuff. AstroTurf, it's so great. And so fun fact, AstroTurf comes from Houston. The first use was in the Astrodome. This is the digital version, which was a sketch for an installation. The installation I found to be highly unsuccessful. However, the sketch I find to be quite interesting. Those shadows still present. We see sort of that looming nature, the freeway interchanges, and also these really linear elements that are coming into my work as well, which they were present before, but you're going to see them develop quite a bit more.
Molly.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
What place brought you more like inspiration, Phoenix or Houston? Like they're kind of different but similar. Which one do you think you got more inspiration from?
Oh, wow. I don't know if I can answer that. I guess I've lived in Houston longer, so maybe it's more inspiration because I'm still inspired by it. I was in Phoenix for 3 years and I've been in Houston for 5. But I still think about Phoenix and I think about the desert in specific. But I think I can't answer it. I can't answer it. That was a good question. You stumped me. I'll say Houston. Houston. They're both equally inspiring. Yeah, nice question. Yeah, so here we see the structure get quite a bit larger. And this is probably, I think this is the last structure of this series that I made. I became kind of uninterested in how they were developing, and I couldn't put the effort into them that I wanted to develop them even further. So they've kind of like gone to the wayside. My work has sort of shifted after this structure, but this was made for the space. This is at the Houston Center for Contemporary Craft. And I just they have these open ceilings. I had to make one that was as tall as I could possibly make it. And so I built this in my apartment at the time, is where my studio was. And I had to build it in halves. So that's what this is here, is me attaching the halves together. It's super, super haphazard, which again, I take a lot of actions that I see around me, like construction is a huge influence, and there's just stuff everywhere and it looks like a mess, and you kind of wonder, is there anything, like, is there any rhyme or reason? And I also think about like how we just put band-aids on things over and over again. We have this action and reaction, action and reaction. And so that's this, like, and this is again the part that my husband doesn't like. He's like, why do you do these like silly little, like, why didn't you just attach it well? And I'm like, because concept, that's why. Also, I like these clips. I like impermanence. And so this was a lot of fun to make. I also, hopefully, yes, I did. I also made some of my own AstroTurf. So you may have noticed, you may not have, but I utilize flagging tape quite a bit. And this is made out of flagging tape, which is utilized to flag an area like a tree to cut down, or like, hey, here's a stick with flagging tape attached to it because we put something here or we need to dig here. They're a marker. They're also this like really interesting plastic material that I like to work with. But more details of this piece. Yeah, utilizing tape again, like I'm covering up mistakes with the tape. So rather than just like doing a good job the first time, I don't do a good job the first time, almost on purpose at this point, and then go back and cover up my mistakes. Again, I'm like mirroring that action of like a jumbled mess that cities kind of are.
Wait, can you go back another? Did you? No, forward. And I had to step out for a second. Maybe you answered this. Did you remove the tiles in the ceiling for this?
No, they already weren't there. And so I made the piece because that ceiling was open.
Oh, that's good.
It worked to my favor. Yeah.
Yes, agreed. Okay.
And we also see the return of like just the normal AstroTurf. So I've got the handmade AstroTurf and the woven. And it's also, you don't see this, but it's like screwed into a piece of wood that's then saran wrapped to it's a little better here, saran wrapped to a paving block. And so it's just like, again, the most haphazard way of putting up this structure. The curator was like, so it's not going to fall over, right? And I'm like, I promise you it's not going to fall over. It's totally secure. It just looks unsecure. But like, this looks haphazard. It wasn't going to fall over. It was sturdy.
I've got some polite students here who don't want to interrupt, but I'm going to interrupt for them.
I'm so sorry. Yes.
So I was gonna ask, instead of like the steel, do you ever use paper for any of your art?
Oh, good question. I do not use paper. I haven't done any paper weaving as far as other than like a fun activity. And there's also yarn that's created from paper, which I also don't work with, but that's a good question. I've been thinking about it though. It's mulling in my brain. Okay, I know I talk really fast and really loud. That's, I think, why I'm a teacher, because I talk fast, I talk loud. So yeah, don't be shy. Don't be shy. All right, so moving on. I was really lucky to have a residency during 2020 that didn't get canceled, and I was the only one there. And so I was alone and not around any people other than my mom. I stayed with my mom during this time. And this was in Colorado Springs. And so I was also able to get outside quite a bit. And so I was outdoors. And then when I was inside, I was by myself. And so it was perfect. 3 months in Colorado Springs, May, June, and July. And during this time, I worked on, oh, you guessed it, work that was inspired by Colorado Springs and the mountains. And I also specifically went into the residency wanting to explore the drawing and digital collage. So I had intent in going into this that I was going to draw things and I was going to digitally collage them. What was it going to be? I don't know. And that's what I figured out. I was also at the time reading the first Dune novel, as well as getting into sci-fi, which has become a major influence in my work as well. And now I'm on the 5th Dune novel, which I lost the other day with like 20 pages left. Can't believe I misplaced it. You can see me. I'm like looking around for it. I know it's somewhere. I've got 20 pages left. So I start thinking about, as the show was called, a present unknown. So mountains have a lot of history. There's life embedded in these rocks, and the Rocky Mountains aren't even the original mountains of the area. There are older Rocky Mountains there. And so I started thinking about this sort of circular timeline, or even a timeline that has no line whatsoever and is just like pulling things out of space and they conglomerate together. So I imagine this time that could be the future, it could be the present, it could be the past, it could be any of those. And so I start combining rocks that I find with downtown structures. So this is a lot more literal as far as the architectural references in my work. I am inspired by architecture, but here I'm actually drawing architecture. So again, it's the same process that this is hand-drawn, scanned, and then collaged in the background. I think you can also, like, if you're familiar with the Dune cover of the novel that came out, the most recent cover, there's definitely lots of planetary bodies. And so as I'm reading this book, I started incorporating planetary bodies. And again, I'm thinking a lot about time with these pieces. And you can see these were printed out. So this is the digital version on the left, and then how it was displayed in the space. So again, I'm thinking about structure. We can see flagging tape utilized a lot more in this work. I'm actually taking the flagging tape and turning it into another material. Yeah. And so I still have one of these structures that I'm thinking about in the studio. I was really excited about these flat 2D structures in relation to the structures that I used to build. You can also see these are much better made. They're not nearly as haphazard as the old structures I used to make. So they became a little bit more refined with this series of work. So that was a fun side note, and which is what led me to get a studio. So I've had my studio here that I'm sitting in for a little over 2 years. When I returned from that residency, I rented this studio, and it's been so amazing to have my own space. It's like a major boon for my work. It's so great. And so this is the point where I start thinking about my screen printed work, which we haven't seen any of up until this point, because I wasn't able to screen print in my apartment. My screen printed work, which is what's here, I start thinking about that as in relation to my woven work, and then also in relation to the city. And so, like I said before, there's a lot more color in my work now because Houston it's so green and it's so colorful, and those colors really influence me. I'm so wow, colors everywhere. That's what my studio looks like too. Wow, colors everywhere. And I also really wanted to challenge myself to work better with color. But what I'm thinking about here is how I can make a print like a weaving and a weaving like a print. And so this is where the linear work, like I just get really obsessed with lines. And I'm like utilizing lines in whatever way that I can, both in the printed work and the woven work. Because as you know from your paper weaving exercises, weaving it's linear. It's a series of lines that are going up and down, interacting with a series of lines that are going sideways, perpendicular to each other, right? And right angles. And so screen printing is a process where you have a screen, and you might have tried it already. You might be familiar. You have a screen, and you put your image on the screen, and you push ink through it. And then the ink ends up on the cloth. And so here, what this is just lines printed over and 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 over again. And what have I described weaving as? This process of going over and 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 over again. So I'm thinking about it not only visually, but also in the process of creating the work, that I'm doing the same thing repetitively. I'm building the same thing line by line. I'm building it layer by layer, both in the woven work and the printed work. This also is the introduction of, I'm not quite ready to go, embroidery into my work, where I start covering up mistakes with embroidery. Prior, I was using paint, or not paint, but tape, and you can't put tape on fabric. It falls off. And so I also was challenging myself to become good at this embroidering technique. And so these little dots through here, I keep selecting this weird, these little dots through here, these lines, those were mistakes that I made on the piece. And you can't erase a screen print. It's permanent once it's done. And so, yeah, that's again this process of adding a Band-Aid. This is the view out of my old apartment. This is out of the very tiny shower window. And then out of the one front window. I had 2 windows. It was a studio apartment. It was very nice. And we had a great view of the sky. And so the sky also became really influential. Houston has really excellent sunsets and sunrises. So again, this is more of that screen printed work where I'm printing line by line by line by line by line. And you see a little bit of that embroidery here and here and here. Again, covering up those mistakes and embracing the fact that I'm not perfect. More colors. So again, a lot more colorful. We get the sort of structure of the skyscraper, right? These vertical, tall structures. And then we start incorporating windows. I don't know why I said we. There's only one of me. But we started incorporating these windows where you can possibly see into the future or see into the past or see into another dimension, perhaps. And they have various formats. I've experimented with just showing the fabric free, or these are stretched like a painting. They also, as you see this transition here where they've got these fuzzy edges to now having these really harsh edges.
Yeah,
there's
and I don't know the timing of this, but I think it's quite nice that you go from the you did the stretched canvas with the leaving the mistakes and the rough edges, and then once you cleaned it up, you brought your clamps back just to leave that little bit of openness, just to not leave the what do you call it, the punctuation at the end of the sentence, it cannot exist.
Exactly. And I think that's true, though. They can't exist without this, that little, it's the human touch, really, that I am drawn to with the clamps and the haphazardness. We're just so haphazard as humans, but yet we're so attracted to perfection. I think about that a lot, too. The balance of not being a perfect person, but yet wanting to be perfect. What does that mean? So here's another one that is also quite clean, but then still incorporates the clamps. And you also notice, right, that there's some unstructuredness to these as far as these fuzzy edges. And now they have become a little bit more structured here. It's still random, but they have nice clean edges. And so as you see, or you're going to see even more structure come into the work. So this is the woven work that sort of corresponds.
Right. I'm sorry. Are these individually titled, or are they just in series?
They're in series.
Okay.
I'm bad at titles, and so the series, these are composites, and then they just have a number after them, depending on when I made them. And now these are reflectors, and so it's reflectors 1, reflector 2, reflector 3, and so forth. Yep. I'm getting a little better at titles the older that I get and the more I learn about my work. Definitely my work is still, I process it every day. I make actions that I don't really understand why I made them. And then 2 years later, I'm like, oh, that's definitely why I did that. That makes so much sense. So the way that I talk about my grad school work now is hundreds of times better than how I talked about it when I was in grad school. I understand it so much better now. So this is the woven work. I held up one of the samples here in my hand. These are very small. They're 12 by 12. I can't see what you see, but I have 2 of them hanging behind me. And so, right, what do you see? These are lines and color. But I'm also starting to incorporate some drawing in the background. I think this is a little bit of me not being able to just like show the weaving by itself and let it stand alone, that I feel like I need to do something else to make it a complete work. And so that's some internal struggle that I have with presenting my weavings, and I'm still trying to figure out. But you see tape, definitely covering up mistakes. Yep, it's not a design element at all. It's totally covering up mistakes, but becomes a design element. These are some reference images here as far as what I'm looking at. This is downtown Houston. And so the environments that I'm seeing, my work is starting to become very influenced by the weather. Again, I'm still thinking about time and thinking about moving into this space that has no time. And so that's kind of what I feel like is happening in this image. That's why I chose foggy images. And I'm also like looking up at things, at these skyscrapers. My studio is just north of downtown, so I spend quite a bit of time passing through downtown. I also take the bus, which is important to note that I take the bus to the studio and have about a half a mile walk from there, depending on the route that I take. And my bus commute after I moved recently a year ago, it takes me about an hour from the time that I leave my house, walk to the bus stop, ride the bus here, walk the rest of the way to the studio. And so I move quite slowly through the city. And that's also really important in this work that I'm making, is that I am looking at the same things over and over again, but I'm also passing by them a little slower than how I usually would, or how Houston is definitely a car city, so you're driving almost everywhere. So I am having a little bit of a different experience with the city. This is a picture of my loom. So that's the one behind me over here, of the work in progress, so you can see it being built. That I have a series of lines, various stripes here that are going vertically, and then I'm working horizontally to build up the structure. This is that same yarn that I have here. It's the stainless steel with whatever structure, as well as I'm using nylon here. So if these are viewed at an angle, they shine quite a bit. And this is a view of my loom and my studio windows here, which again you see behind me. So again, pretty small these works are, 12 by 12. I also started incorporating this kind of grass structure because Houston was a grassland prior to becoming Houston. So I'm thinking about some of that native environment, or what it used to be like, in combination of what it is now. So to me, while this is mildly abstract, it definitely represents a skyscraper standing in a field by itself, which is like really attractive imagery to me right now. More views of skyscrapers, and also how the light interacts with these skyscrapers. So these are the same ones that were outside of my window. This one is new. This one was where when we moved in, and this one got built while we lived there. But these are both white buildings. And here this is sunset. And so I'm also interested in how light and time changes the structure of these skyscrapers and how they mimic the environments around them through the windows, because a lot of them are fully glass skyscrapers. So that's why these are called reflectors, because they're reflecting what's around them. They're like, it's almost like they're recording the time as if they were the mountains of Houston. Pause.
Decide if you want to screen print it or weave it. Like,
That's a good question. Some things are not possible to achieve in weaving, and so that's why they become screen prints. So I don't necessarily like come up with a design and then decide, will this be screen printed or will this be woven? I first start, I'm going to make a screen print, and then I come up with the design. And the way that I was working with those sort of fuzzier images, screen printing, you have to plan, as you have to know what the image is that you're going to print over and over again, or whatever you're going to print. But otherwise, you can kind of make decisions on the fly. And that's what those were. I was just like, okay, I'll print this line here. I'll print this line here. Oh, okay, I'll print this line here. And just was building it up. with weaving, I have to do some planning to decide, okay, what is the structure going to be? And what are the colors that are going to go on the loom? So I have to have some sort of foresight to know, like, okay, I kind of know what I want this to look like. And so I'm going to just like move past these to this work where I'm starting to print those lines that are more structured. And this is also a repeating pattern. While it does look kind of random, there is a repeating motif that goes through this whole pattern, and I'm printing it on a grid. And so in this case, I'm having to do a lot more planning to decide what is going to be created. I said very early that I like to pick up things. Here's an image of what I picked up that then resulted in the piece here on the left. I didn't include any of the blue for whatever reason, but you see those same shapes repeated over and over again, and then just like bouncing back to this image, right? It's just the line over and over again. So this takes a little bit more planning for me to come up with. More things that I see on my walks. Another that's the same pattern, so it's the same repeating motif and it's printed in the same way, just in a different color way. And then this is also quite a bit of stuff that I'm picking up on my walks. Okay, so then this work becomes even more planned, that I'm sketching this now in Illustrator. Oh, I got to see a question. I saw a hand.
Oh, thank God. Okay.
I'm so sorry.
What material would you say you prefer to use with the stainless steel? You talked about using nylon and stuff like that. So which would you say you prefer to use with the stainless steel?
Oh, that's a good question. Okay, so it comes in either stainless steel silk combo or stainless steel linen. I use the silk mostly for the warp, which is what goes on the loom, because it's stronger. The linen's really hairy and it gets like stuck together and it becomes hard to weave. So a lot of times I'm using the linen as the weft, which is what goes horizontally. I see another hand.
Is your work that you do always based on the place that you live in?
Always. Yes, 100%. And that's something I figured out, like, I don't know, probably like 3 years ago, that I finally made the realization that literally everything I make is based on where I am at the time. Yeah.
Okay, hold on, let me figure out how to phrase this. So, one word to describe your works in each of the places that you've been.
Okay, do I have to start in Kansas?
Yes.
All right. Okay, Kansas would be abandoned. Phoenix, Tempe would be landscaping. Houston, pattern.
I like that.
Wow, that was a good question. I gotta write that down. I gotta write it down. What's up?
You mentioned something about being a teacher. Do you teach people how to do this kind of work or other kind of work?
That's a good question. I teach people how to do all kinds of work. So I teach in university and I teach digital art there. So I teach Photoshop, Illustrator, After Effects, and InDesign, those Adobe programs. But then in person, I teach quite a few workshops for printed textiles, is what this process is called, screen printing a pattern on fabric. I teach this in a workshop. I also teach dyeing workshops and various like fiber techniques. The one thing that I don't teach is weaving. Yeah, good question. All right, another one. I'm gonna like advance the slide so we can see. All right, go ahead.
Would you say that you're still kind of drawn to like the sculpture type of art, or are you mostly just right now focused on like the like patterns and design, like you're doing that?
That is such a good question, and it's so appropriate actually, because I have been really conflicted in the last, I'll say this is like in the last 2 months, that I'm like really unsatisfied with making things that hang on the wall. I'm not understanding their purpose as like they're just decoration. And I know that that has a purpose. It definitely makes our homes feel better. But like, why else am I creating this thing? Not that I have to have a reason to create, because I have always been a creator from when I was a kid to now. So it's like in my DNA to create. But I'm like, why? Why am I making this? I know that I'm processing, but like, where does it go from there? And so I've started thinking about making functional items. I don't know if I'm gonna actually explore that or not. It makes me really nervous, especially because I perceive things that are functional as they have to be perfect. So that's a little bit of something that I have to get over, is like some perfectionism in myself. But I have started, there's some sculptural things that are like, who knows what those are. But I have started, this is one of my most recent pieces, reincorporating the structure in paired with the weaving, but in more of a framed format. But again, I'm still kind of unsatisfied with this like hanging on the wall thing. I don't know what it means for me right now. Good question. Any other questions?
Is that a layer of something behind the linen?
I have the sample right here with me. Okay, cool. All right. So this is a process called double weave, which is also what these are as well. Double weave is my favorite thing to weave, and it's weaving 2 pieces of cloth at once. And so here where the little, the little grid structure, so on there, this is the second piece of cloth like interacting. So this is actually, if I flip this around, 2 layers of cloth. Can we see that?
Yeah.
2 layers of cloth woven at the same time. And in this case, I'm weaving one more gauzy than the other one. In this case, this is also 2 layers of cloth, but it's not an open structure. There's too much interaction, so there's not pockets. And it's also at the same, you call it set. So it's the same width of the fibers of the yarn. They're right. And this one, the fibers are close together, and here they're far apart. And we see the astroturf like embedded in the piece. This is about plants growing out of concrete in Bering Ditch, which is this man-made dug ditch that I live by now, that is totally full of concrete. It has a little bit of water in it, and literally everywhere that there's a crack or like dirt that's accumulated, there's some kind of plant growing up out of the concrete. And I just love that interaction, this like urban ecology of this terribly ugly ditch with all of these beautiful plants growing out of it. And so that is what resulted in this work. And that's actually something that I'm excited about exploring more in my work, is like responding to Bering Ditch and cataloging those plants in some way.
You didn't ask for any. No, I'm just gonna say it.
Do it.
So I think the timing of this right now, and you're talking about your relationship with the wall and the adornment of something upon the wall, but everything you do is so based in place, and particularly in Houston architecture, that
Right.
if you removed a section of that drywall that piece is in front of and extended that above the piece or something, then it's not so much using the wall as much as your pieces just become the architecture of the place.
I love it. So are you gonna find me a gallery that'll let me remove the wall?
I mean, it seems like
No, it's so good.
Such a simple solution of like, if you just look behind that other layer, and I saw a portion of a stud that went, and then it like broke the plane below or above it, and then it becomes the space.
I love it.
Especially with the especially with the AstroTurf. It's so silly. Not silly, and I mean it's like
No,
makes
it's
sense.
silly. Yeah,
And
it's
then
so
you
good.
can even like go behind that and put a piece of tape on the stud. Oh shit, this is good. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I love it. I love it. It's good.
All right, we have a
Be sitting
4 seconds.
is the wall. Yeah, that's so good. I know, right? We don't have long. And I think this is pretty much the end. Here's the piece on the loom. Here's some like digital sketches. You see what one of them became. Actually, it's on this side of me. If you can see that, I'll kind of like move the camera. Hopefully now you can see it. I'm sorry, I can't see what you see. So this piece on the right became what's hanging there. So again, I'm just showcasing like how planned some of this work has become, which is really not in my MO to plan so much. So I'm processing things a lot differently these days. Some of the influence, this is a park in Houston. Here's the piece on the table. Here's the influence. Thank you. Oh, I'll stop sharing my screen there. Now I can see myself a little better and I can see you. Cool. Well, thanks so much. Are there any other questions?
3, 2, 1. Oh wait, don't get out of 301. Oh. There it is. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cool. Thank you.
All right. That was fantastic.
Cool. I'm glad. I feel like I talked a lot there.
But okay, bye. Bye. See you tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
See you tomorrow. Let me get switched off there. Okay. Oh, that was I loved it. I didn't know any of that early stuff. That was like I'm in complete disagreement with your husband. I think
Yes.
those structures are
They're so
what.
good, right?
Yeah,
Makes it.
I
Yeah.
agreed. Yeah. And the shadows, like, well, hold on, let me, well, I'll take this out later. I'll take this out later
The
and I'll edit.
recording. Yeah, sure.
I guess I can do that now. Let's see, more, stop recording.